Hello dear colleagues, welcome to the series of the video for the Microsoft workshop, Azure Immersion workshop about Azure Migrate, how to use, how to do the migration, and this one is the second video about this migration, and this video will be about migrate the application database. We will look how to do the to create the database migration service, how to do the assessment, how to create the project inside data migration service, and after that how to do exactly the migration of the schema and of the database. And I want to notice you that the previous one lab about the discovery and assessment of the on-premise environment itself with the different virtual machines is already in place, and all other videos about this immersion workshop and different Microsoft workshops you can find the links inside the description of the video or in notification or after the video. So please join, look to better understand how Azure Migrate works and how you can use it. So the second part, this one is the last step of the previous lab where we tried to get the dependencies between virtual machines inside the on-premise existing infrastructure to better understand what we have to migrate, which connections we have there, etc. And right now let's go to this part of the solution, SQL database. We are not migrating the SQL database like infrastructure as a service virtual machine. We are migrating the data directly to the SQL database, Azure SQL database. And to do this, we need to create DMS, database migration services, this one. And we have to create the new database migration services in our project. Let's create it. We will migrate SQL Server, MySQL, etc. This one. Oops. Select. And what we have to define here, that's our subscription, our resource group where this service will be placed. And this service should be placed in special, like let's say service group. This service group, service will be named here, like this. And placement of these service groups should be central US. It's really important to have the right access to the right networking, etc., etc. Service mode. It's again also really important to better understand how we will migrate. This one is Azure, means that we will use the migrate service, database migrate service, exactly to connect from Azure and work from Azure. With the hybrid, it means that we will run this service like virtual appliance, like we did this for the assessment. We install virtual appliance on-premise database. Why we need this? In case if we have no connection from Azure to on-premise infrastructure, but have vice versa, right? It's why again important migration service, database migration service should have connectivity to both source and target environment, direct connectivity. We will configure right now this one, and we will use Azure. Plus pricing tier, it's also really important. We have like a standard with the 1, 2, 4 cores And premium for course. Premium we need to have for the faster deployment, etc. Standards just like with the normal database, and standard one is for free for you. Premium one, if you look on it, after 6 months you have to pay for this service. So you have to decide what size you need. For example, I choose 2 cores, apply just to be faster, a little bit faster. Second one, we are selecting the network, and as I mentioned before, we need to place this migration service to the network that has the connectivity to on-prem and to the target. We have this network, name it DMS. Our virtual machines, on-premise virtual machines, connected to this network, let's say by site-to-site VPN. And the second one, SQL database, will be configured next step. Okay, so we will build our environment. We need to wait on it, because again we are building just like virtual machines with ETL, let's say, that will be managed from the Azure portal by creating the project and sending the comments to this project. And typically again it takes like 5, 10, 15 minutes, up to 20 minutes, let's say. Let's wait. Okay, database migration services is ready, was deployed, and right now we need to configure it to work with the second part. So we have direct connection to the virtual machines on premise, but still have no access to the SQL Server, Azure SQL database, the target option, and this SQL Server should be published inside the virtual network where we placed database migration service by private endpoint. To do this, we have to go here to the SQL Server, we have to go to the firewall and virtual networks. We deny the public access, do not allow to connect by the different networking, and go to the private endpoint connection. And right now we need to create the new private endpoint, put it to our resource group, use the same network region, because it's really important to have the same network. Oops. Next, we will publish the SQL servers. We will use the database, and it will be the SQL server. So it exactly our network, and right now we have to define which network will be used. Sorry. TM network, and this one is just one subnet where we place it exactly the migration service, database migration service, subscription, resource group for monitoring. For the object where it will be placed, like a primary DNS, it should be integrated with the DNS. And right now, do not forget to use the right tags here. Create. Let's wait until this part will be done and check our endpoint and check exactly the private DNS zone to see is it work correctly or not, because it is important to have the connectivity between private DNS zone object and subnet. Waiting for this. So we mostly done, but we need to do after that the next step. The next step will be check SQL Server itself. Is it possible to migrate this database to the Azure? Are there some dependencies inside the SQL database on premise? And to do this, we again go to the Azure Migrate. We are going to the database, and in this database, we need to add additional assessment tools. We will use the Microsoft Database Assessment free tool here, and we need also add the migration tool. Also, we will add the Azure Migrate database migration free to use service. It's still creating the endpoint. We are ready here, and to continue we need to connect directly to the SQL Server and check the data. To do this, we will use Data Migration Assistant. We need to pre-configure it to allow this Data Migration Assistant to connect to Azure, because by default, if you even install on some server on premise Data Migration Assistant, it will not work as expected, because again you need to change some line inside the configuration. This file, configuration file, we can open it with the Notepad++, and we need to enable assessment for the SQL. Just a second. Let's do this way. Azure. Great. So yeah, here. As you can see, this configuration file contains commented parameter. We save it, and we're ready to go. Let's rerun again. And start new. It will be assessment, the name of the project. It will be database engine, it will be SQL Server, and target will be Azure SQL Database. And what we need to check compatibility, we need to check features. Next one. For next one, we need to provide the IP address. Again, this tool could be installed inside the SQL Server virtual machine or whatever, or somewhere, even in Azure, in some virtual machine in Azure or on-premise that has direct access to the SQL Server to do the assessment. To do the assessment, it will be SQL authentication, username SA, and password. Trust SQL certificate, because we don't know. And we can see 06 smart hotel registration. We can add it to our project and start assessment. As you can see, service broker feature is not supported. Partially supported features, no. So we are good to go, and we can upload this report to the Azure Migrate service, because it's on Azure Migrate service. Do not mix Azure Migrate service and Azure database migration service. This information will be migrated and assessed for the tools in Azure Migrate service, but depends how you're planning to use. Send to Azure. It will ask us to authenticate, and to do this, we need to sign in, select the subscription, and select our project. And data for the further usage will be uploaded. So we did assessment. We did not find any issues, and we good to go to continue with the migration services. But for the migration services, we need to double check endpoint. Let's go to the endpoint, and here you can see the DNS configuration. Let's put this network interface connected to the same network, etc. And we can see private link, etc. to the private DNS zone. It's really important to have this private DNS zone to be connected to the right network. You see, for now, we have completed connectivity to the virtual network DMS. It means that when DMS service, any device inside this DMS VNet, will try to resolve the name of the Azure SQL Server or Azure SQL database that we need to migrate, where we need to migrate, it will find it exactly in the right place inside this private DNS zone, because it's connected here. So we are ready to go. And next one, let's go back to the database migration. Azure Database Migration Services. Let's go to the Azure Database Migration Services. There is now our database, and we need to create migration project. What it means? It means that it will be exactly the commands to this migration service what we have to do. It's easiest part, but you have to plan it, because not all instances, for example, if you're planning to migrate to SQL managed instance, for the live migration, it's supported only for the business and premium managed instances. Otherwise, you have to use a migration project with the mode do the backup. We will do the project with the project only, just empty, just to see right settings and how you can do this migration step by step. The name of the project, it will be SQL it will be SQL database, create. We have to provide the source SQL. Again, managed instance should work correctly with the direct access. It will be this IP because it's not internal network, but it's how Azure sees this network. We need to use the SQL, and here will be SA, and here will be password for the demo user. And of course we will trust the certificate. And next. For the next, we have to publish, select the database, and after that select the target. For the target database, we can find required name here. This one. Okay, we have connection. We have the same database that we checked before. It works correctly. Registration. Next. Select the target. The target will be here inside the properties of SQL Server in Azure. And we will put it here. Again, to resolve this name, we exactly created the private endpoint. And it will be SQL authentication, but user will be demo user with another password. Next. The system will check connectivity between source and target from the database migration services in Azure, and does nothing. To do the exactly migration, we need to choose activity, and this activity could be different for different scenarios. As I mentioned before, for example, to do the migration from on-premise SQL Server or any SQL Server in virtual machine to the managed instance. Managed instance should be premium or business. In case if you're planning to do this with the standard managed instance, there will be only offline backup migration. It means that SQL Server will be configured to do the backup to the Azure, so you will need the special storage account where you will use the storage, where you will put the backup. You will need to have the key to this, access key to this account, and the tool will configure the backup, execute the backup, and restore the backup on the second machine. For our configuration, it's more easier because we can use the direct connection and direct migration. So right now I am doing schema migration. So I just copy the schema of the database and create empty database, but it will be exactly the required database. Select the target, its correct target with the by the way, did I? Yeah, I think yes. Map the target database. So we need to use this one, and this one, and we have this database, not registration, and we can set DB to read only in case if we are doing the huge migration and we care about exactly the right parameters and right data. Just for example, till the night of working hour migration, we can set read only to be sure that we migrated exactly the right data. And what we can see here, it will migrate history, source will not exist, and we will move it. Why target table does not exist? Yes, it's correct. Let's repeat. Schema only migration. Ah, correct. Looks like I choose the data migration. Connect to the user. Generate from source. Schema, target database. We need to choose the target database. And activity. Let's choose, I don't know, DB schema. Right now we can see the pending command. Running. It will generate the script. By the way, this script could be crashed because sometimes if you're using some names based on, like, let's say, of some T-SQL commands, etc., it could be crashed. But for this task, it will be fine, like remove or something like this. Still waiting. To check what's going on, we can check our database. This is the database. This is exactly the database where we are doing the migration. And you can see that 2% of utilization happens right now. And after that, if you have some Data Explorer, Azure Data Explorer or something like this, you will be able to look on the database and see the schema of the database. Just let's do this way. Okay, nothing. Completed. So schema was migrated. Right now we have the second step. The second step will be exactly the data migration, where we will move the data to the existing database. So we will use this registration. We will connect to the second database. And target database will be the Smart Hotel DB. It will check which tables, etc., will be migrated. But as far as we build all schemas, etc., we can go for now. We don't need to migrate the migration history. why we need it. No, just the second booking table, and let's name this db migrate data migration. So the same scenario, it will be pending. After that, run execution, and if data is okay and connectivity is okay, etc., you will be able to migrate the data. And again, please check the requirements for your size of your database, the performance of your database, and use, for example, premium data migration service instead of the standard one, to be sure that you will have enough performance to move your database. As you can see, so 2.84 megabytes of the data were migrated. Let's check the, yeah, you can see even 8% of utilization was used. You can see how many spaces was used inside the data SQL, etc. So for this scenario, for this step, we totally done. Instead of changing the SQL Server parameters and removing the private endpoint, we don't need for now to use the private endpoint to provide the connectivity between DMS network, where we place database migration services, and SQL service. So right now we are good to remove this private endpoint, and that's all. So we run through all our parameters, all our requirements. We create the migration service. We configure the migration service. We migrate the schema. We migrate the on-premise data. Again, the scenarios that you saw before really depends and vary about, depends on the type, what data you take, and what is the target of your data migration. Maybe you will need to go with the storage account, etc. By the way, for the storage account and all this configuration, we will talk on the next lab, the third and final part of the migration. We will use the storage account for the mostly the same proposal. We will move virtual disks of the virtual machine from on-premise to the Azure storage account to have required virtual machine managed disk in Azure, and we will store the replica. Let's see it, and again we will create the private endpoints, etc., but it will be the next lab. And I want to notice you that you can find all links about the previous lab, next lab, in the description of this video, on the annotation notification inside this video, or right now at the end of this video, like additional links. Be in touch and look next step to do the migration of the virtual machines to Azure.